So I watch a hell of a lot of video game analysis. I mean, it takes up most of my day. And in doing so, I've seen a lot of videos that talk about difficulty in video games, specifically whether or not difficulty is an inherently better or worse thing for a game to have. This topic comes up all the time when discussing the Dark Souls series, because Dark Souls is known for a game that's uncompromisingly difficult. It doesn't have an easy mode, it has a pretty steep learning curve. It expects you to get good. You're not going to have fun with the game unless you play it enough to become good at it. And I agree with the assessment that Dark Souls doesn't need an easy mode. I think it's a fantastic game. I think the difficulty is a very important part of what makes it work, but I also feel like there's been a sort of leap in logic when it comes to a lot of video game reviewers who talk about Dark Souls and then make the assertion that video games should always be hard. People bring it up a lot when they talk about classic games, how those games were harder, and they say that these modern games just hold your hand and that they're easy, appealing to the lowest common denominator, etc. But I'm going to posit that when a game is really hard to get into, that means that it has a high skill floor. Like, the minimum amount of skill you need to play the game is pretty high, right? A game like Dark Souls, you're not going to get very far in it unless you get good at it. You have to learn the mechanics, learn the structure, and the game's not going to hold your hand through it. But I think more importantly than that, what makes Dark Souls a classic game, what makes it so replayable that people go back to it again and again and again, is that it also has a high skill ceiling. You can always get better at Dark Souls. Yes, the first time you play through it, you have to get really good if you want to play through the entire game. A lot of people take 90 hours to beat Dark Souls for the first time. But you can get so much better to the point that you can beat Dark Souls in an hour. You can eventually be good enough at it that you can beat the entire game at Soul Level 1 using only a shield for combat. What makes Dark Souls special isn't that it's so hard, it's that it allows the player to always keep improving and playing the game in new ways, finding new challenges to put on yourself, where you can say, yeah, the game was hard, but now it's easy because I'm good at it, so I'm going to make it hard for myself again, and the game allows you to. And I think that, more than anything, has been a common factor in games with a high replayability, games that survive the test of time. It sort of falls in with what a lot of people refer to as emergent gameplay, which is where the player themselves make the game different. Like, you do things that the game designers didn't necessarily expect for you to do in order to make the game more interesting for yourself. A lot of mods are like this, or deciding to play the game but you're not allowed to use a certain item the whole way through. But really, in truly great games, this isn't really emergent gameplay, it just means that they've actually planned for you to be able to do whatever you want. When you play Super Metroid, there are a ton of different ways that you can make it through the game because there's lots of shortcuts and different things that you can do to get through quicker, but it's not really emergent gameplay. You're not making it up yourself. The programmers allowed that. They made it so that if you know the game well enough, you can play through it differently. A game that you can always be getting better at, always be learning new things about, is a game with a high skill ceiling. And it doesn't matter how high the skill floor is if the skill ceiling is sky high, because it means that no matter how good you have to be to start off the game, as long as you can keep getting better, there's always incentive to keep playing. A game series that I think is perfect for describing this is the Kirby games. Now, I did a video on the Kirby game series not long ago in which I said that the reason that these games are so popular, the core appeal of them, is that they are games where you are super overpowered. You just run through, you wreck everything, it feels super cathartic and super cool, and you can be a total badass. But the thing is that Kirby games have a low skill floor. Anybody can beat one. They're super easy. But they allow for you to play them like a hardcore gamer. There's allowances for you to go as fast as possible, to go and get 100%, to play on harder difficulties. There's challenge modes in a lot of the games. Kirby's Return to Dreamland has challenge modes that require you to keep playing the level again and again until you've just mastered it. You need to know exactly what order to press the buttons in to get through the level just right. Yeah, anyone can finish challenge mode, but getting a gold medal in challenge mode, it can take a while. It can take perfecting the controls and movements. That's why Kirby games survive so much in the speedrunning community, where people will memorize where the enemies are that have the rolling ability so that they can get there and then roll through levels as fast as possible, you know, learning everything about the game to play it as fast and as intensely as possible. I don't think the problem is that games are too easy or that they're holding your hand. The problem is that not enough games allow the player to go play it in a different way. Having a big tutorial, not a problem. Having an unskippable big tutorial, kind of obnoxious. Having a game that's completely linear, not necessarily a bad thing. Kirby's completely linear, but making it so you can explore that linear world in different ways by using different techniques, by saying this time I'm going to use this power-up instead of that one, by, in like a Mega Man game, by having 8 different levels that you could go in whichever order you want, and playing them will be different. It's not just that in Mega Man X you can go to each of the 8 levels individually, it's that depending on what powers you get, in what order, it will change your game experience. You will have a much harder time beating a Robot Master boss if you don't have the correct power-up to defeat them, but you can do it, and it'll even be more satisfying and more cool if you can pull that off. The game allows you to do things in whatever order you want, and I think that's the kind of freedom gamers really want. Now, nothing I'm saying here is necessarily new, these aren't like the freshest ideas ever, but I think it's important that we kind of figure this out on like a core level. I hear people talk about difficulty, I hear people talk about a high skill ceiling, I hear people talk about freedom and being able to do whatever you want in a game, but I think we need to sort of take all these elements and look at them all at once. Say, well, what does difficulty suggest about a game? It's not difficulty that makes it good or makes it memorable. It's not necessarily just freedom. It's not necessarily just the skill ceiling. It's sort of all these things combined. Easy games can be super memorable and fun. Games that are just moderately hard, if they can get better, if you can play like old school Sonic the Hedgehog, where Sonic's not really a hard game, but it's not satisfying to play the first time. You have to get good at it to make it more fun. When you play through Sonic and you know everything you're doing and you can just rush through a level at maximum speed, that's when Sonic was most satisfying. That's why there's just certain games that the speedrunning community latches onto, because those games understand that. They're games that have that ability to play through it in a different way than what was the initial, like, first experience. Altogether, I think it's something to look out for, to give consideration to. Don't think about how easy is this game or how hard is this game. Think about how much fun is it to play it when it's not on easy mode anymore. You know, like maybe you play a game that's linear and simplistic on normal mode, but if the game has an insane difficulty, then I think it's unfair to say, oh, it's a coddling and it's appealing only to the modern gamers and holding your hand and everything, but it's like there's other difficulty modes. The whole point is that, yeah, it was easy the first time, but you can get better, you can play it on higher difficulties, and if a game is more fun on those high difficulties, then that's always interesting. There was a great video by the guy, I don't remember his name, he did the script of Borderlands 2. That guy did a video a long time ago that not a lot of people watched, but he talked about how when he played Metal Gear Solid games, then he had found them really boring until he played them on the highest difficulty, because it forced him to find out that the game had so many ways it could be played. And you can really see the exploration of all those ways in the Super Bunny Hop video about Metal Gear Solid 3, where he talks about how high-level gameplay is like this crazy mindfuck of what you're actually doing in comparison to what you'd be doing at low-level play. And I think too many reviewers especially rush through games so quickly that they don't necessarily see all the potential of how the game can be played differently. When a reviewer plays through a game at normal difficulty and they just kind of rush through it, then their impression tends to be very different from someone who gets super into the game. And I've always found that reviews of games tend to be more worthwhile when they come out long after the game is already released, because the people who have had time to really get into the game will understand it better. That's why we have these cult classic games, games that didn't make a huge splash when they first came out, but over time became to be really well known as these amazing games. Anyways, hopefully I've given you some food for thought, or food for writing better game reviews. I just wish I lived in a world where game reviewers didn't review stuff the week it came out, and instead reviewed it after a year when they've played it all the way through, and when people have talked about it, and someone who loves the game has found out how to make it good, and then everyone else goes back and replays it, you know? Some reviewers will argue things like, I shouldn't have to play through 10 hours of a game before it gets good, and I completely understand that. But if there are ways to make the game more interesting, then it might appeal to some people who do want to go, oh man, maybe I'll play through it again on hard mode and New Game Plus where it's way better and everything works now, and you know, you never know what the audience is going to think. I just want there to be more voices, I guess is what I'm saying. And that's all.